Mr. Distinguished panelists, excellencies, distinguished colleagues and friends, good morning from New York and good evening to those who have joined us from Bangladesh. I welcome you all to our webinar today, organized as a part of our celebration of the birth centenary of the father of the nation, Bangabandhus. We are very pleased to have Subir and Malini Chowdhury Center for Bangladesh Studies at UC Berkeley as our partner for today's event. We are honored to have with us the Honorable Foreign Minister of Bangladesh. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us from Dhaka this late hour and also after your very long flight. We are also very pleased to have with us today three very distinguished panelists, and I thank Mr. Salil Tripathi and Mr. Tom Dine for joining us today. We thank you for your important work on Bangladesh and for being such good friends of Bangladesh. And we are keenly looking forward to hearing your perspectives on Bangabandhu and Bangladesh today. I thank Professor Dr. Anwar Hussain of Dhaka University and also the Bangabandhu Chair and the Bangladesh University professionals for joining us from Dhaka. Thank you, sir, for being with us despite the lateness of the hour. Distinguished guests, Honorable Foreign Minister, this is a very special year for us. This year, we are celebrating the birth centenary of our founding father, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. This celebration coincides with another milestone, the Golden Jubilee of our independence. On this auspicious occasion, I wish to pay my humble homage to the father of the nation and convey our profound gratitude to him, whose selfless, lifelong struggle and visionary leadership brought us our long-cherished independence and the emergence of Bangladesh. As we celebrate these two special occasions, we also got the good news last Friday that the UN Committee on Development Policy recommended Bangladesh for graduation from the LDC status. This is a historic milestone for us. What better tribute can there be to the memory of the father of the nation on his birth centenary than this? I take this opportunity to thank our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina for successfully leading our country to this stage. It is her visionary, bold, and pragmatic leadership that helped us achieve this success, even in the midst of the unprecedented crisis brought on by the pandemic. Distinguished colleagues, in 1972, when Bangabandhu took up the task of rebuilding the newly independent Bangladesh, the political climate in the international arena was complex. As a fledgling nation state, we were faced with many challenges. Besides devoting his attention to national reconstruction efforts, Bangabandhu had to undertake the Herculean task of getting recognition for his newly independent country to make our rightful place in the Committee of Nations. He embraced those challenges and dedicated himself in fulfilling the aspirations of his people. He dreamt of building a Sonar Bangla, a land where all will have a life free from want and hunger. To fulfill that dream, the international community's support was critically important. With that realization in mind, Bangabandhu prioritized his foreign policy vision. He decided to lead the country towards peace and development and announced a far-reaching and unifying foreign policy dictum: friendship to all, malice towards none. At the heart of this doctrine was the principle of neutrality. He often used to say that he wanted Bangladesh to be the Switzerland of the East. And it was not merely an economic vision. It was about ensuring the right balance in his foreign policy orientation vis-a-vis the great power rivalries. He had no hesitation to align Bangladesh with the non-aligned movement, drawn to its principles of neutrality and the sovereign equality of nations. Based on his visions and tireless efforts in reaching out to world leaders, within 3.5 years, Bangladesh received recognition from almost all countries of the world. By the end of 1973, we became a member of all key international organizations. And finally, on the 17th of September 1974, Bangladesh joined the United Nations as its 136th member. Indeed, it was the charismatic leadership of Bangabandhu, his towering personality, his wisdom and pragmatism that made all this possible within a short span of time. And his vision and values continue to shape our foreign policy and development vision. Distinguished colleagues, the aspirational policy direction of Bangabandhu achieved momentum when he took the podium of the UN General Assembly in 1974. His statement was historic for many reasons. For the first time in the UN's history, Bangla was pronounced in the UN. He decided to deliver his maiden statement in Bangla. By doing so, he wanted to send a strong message of the distinct identity and pride of his nation, of the Bengalis. Secondly, the statement not only focused on the significance of Bangladesh's independence and its membership to the UN, it also ushered a set of new ideas for the entire international community. The overarching theme of his statement was about ensuring peace and justice for everyone, everywhere. And he linked it with the struggle of his own people. He declared in unequivocal terms that the very struggle of Bangladesh symbolized the universal struggle for peace and justice. He called for building a world free of economic inequalities, social justice, aggression, and threats of a nuclear war. Bangabandhu called for the revival of human unity and brotherhood to change the inequality that prevailed in the economic situation of the world at that time. An idea we find even more relevant today when the COVID-19 pandemic has made fractures in the current international development system strikingly visible. He invited the international community to harness the power of reasoning to build an equitable international economic system. He drew the attention of global leaders to the international responsibility to make sure that everybody in the world can enjoy their economic, social, and cultural rights. Reposing his full trust in the principle and objectives of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, he reaffirmed his conviction that the establishment of international rights, negotiations, and peaceful environment can alleviate economic crisis. These are all quotes from his historic statement in the UNGA in 1974. Bangabandhu believed in the policy of peaceful coexistence and friendship with all. He also advocated for peaceful solution of international disputes, a principle that Bangladesh continues to pursue in its international relations. He highlighted the importance of international humanitarian law in relation to conflict and post-conflict reconciliation efforts, and emphasized the urgency of justice, without which he believed that peace can never be sustainable. As my country's representative to the United Nations, what makes me immensely proud is that Bangabandhu realized the power of multilateralism back in 1974. He pronounced clearly his faith in the UN as a center of people's future hopes and aspirations. On the very first day of our journey in the UN, he stated that the great ideology which has been enshrined in the UN Charter is the ideology of the people of Bangladesh. That legacy, dear colleagues, lives on even today. In the UN, we lend our voice and leadership to all those issues that aim at building an inclusive and equal society. Our calls for vaccine equality, eliminating digital divide, and promoting climate justice, for instance, are but a few examples of our role as a responsible member of the United Nations now. As we celebrate the birth centenary of our founding father and the golden jubilee of our independence, his visions and his ideals continue to guide us. Self-reliance was his goal. Today, I'm privileged to represent a country that is making its firm strides towards self-reliance. With those few words, I shall stop here and invite our Honorable Foreign Minister, the chief guest, and our distinguished panelists to share their thoughts and insights on Bangabandhu's foreign policy visions. Sir, it is my distinct honor now to call upon you, our Honorable Foreign Minister, Dr. A.K. Abdul Momen, to deliver his remarks. Honorable Foreign Minister, you have the floor, sir.
I thank the Permanent Mission of Bangladesh to the UN for organizing this important event. I also thank the Center for Bangladesh Studies at the University of California, Berkeley, for joining this initiative.
He declared Bangladesh's core foreign policy dictum as friendship to all, malice towards none. This philosophy essentially originates from the ideals of inclusiveness and his firm commitment to emancipate his people from cracks of poverty, deprivation, and of course injustice, which remained a central tenet to the political discourse of Bangabandhu. In his maiden speech at the UN General Assembly in 1974, he elaborated on this further. I quote, Bangladesh from its very inception has adopted a non-aligned policy based upon the principles of peaceful coexistence and friendship towards all. Our total commitment to peace is born of the realization that only an environment of peace would enable us to enjoy the fruits of our hard-won national independence and to mobilize and concentrate all our energies and resources in combating the scourges of poverty, hunger, disease, illiteracy, and of course, unemployment. In a highly divided bipolar world in the Cold War era, Bangabandhu was keenly aware of the importance of a distinctive niche for new and emerging nations. He was ideologically very upright, yet essentially pragmatic to uphold the best interest of his own country, Bangladesh. He therefore decided to pursue a neutral foreign policy based on universal values and principles. He projected Bangladesh as a peace-loving nation with a high aspiration for transformative change in the lives of and the livelihoods of its people. The Constitution of Bangladesh, which came out within just 10 months of his term in office, was a testimony to that. It espoused democracy, nationalism, socialism in the sense of social justice, and secularism as the four pillars of this statecraft. His concept of secularism was that everyone would enjoy their religion and beliefs in harmony and without fear and favor. And it inculcated the universal principles of human rights and fairness and justice in their true spirits. I'm sure my friend Professor Syed Anwar Hussain would also highlight on these basic premises of Bangabandhu's foreign policy. Bangabandhu's foreign policy was marked by dynamism, coupled with neutrality and high moral standing in the global arena. It earned Bangladesh the recognitions of almost all the countries of the world within a very short span of time. By 1974, Bangabandhu's government earned diplomatic recognition of most nations in Asia, Africa, Europe, and Americas. His exemplary leadership and personal sacrifice were acknowledged by world leaders with high level of empathy. In the multilateral arena, Bangladesh was admitted into almost all important global organizations, including the United Nations, the Commonwealth, World Bank, NAM, G77, and the OIC. Bangabandhu demonstrated his diplomatic charisma and political pragmatism in his entire career. However, in February 1974, Bangladesh entry into the Organization of Islamic Countries, or OIC, is one of his brightest legacy. He agreed to join the OIC and attend its forthcoming summit in Lahore, Pakistan, only if Pakistan first formally recognized Bangladesh. Although military generals of Pakistan butchered his people, destroyed his land, yet to establish peace and stability and to save the lives of thousands of stranded Bangladeshi and also Pakistanis, he agreed to develop relations with Pakistan in spite of mounting anti-Pakistan sentiment at the time. He declared no development can happen without peace, and he hoped to make Bangladesh an island of peace that would emit peace and justice across the region. The relationship with India was central in Bangladesh's post-independent foreign policy. Bangabandhu acknowledged with gratitude the generosity of the Indian government to stand for Bangladesh people in 1971, especially in accommodating 10 million refugees, the invaluable diplomatic support, and the sacrifices of the Indian armed forces during a war of liberation. However, he believed that for the two countries to take the relations to a new height, the Indian troops must return home immediately. The eventual withdrawal of Indian armed forces from Bangladesh led to a new era of partnership between our two friendly neighbors. India and Bangladesh. And it culminated in a 25-year treaty of friendship, the historic land boundary agreement, and fruitful discussions on water sharing issues. I'm sure that Mr. Tripathi will elaborate on some of these aspects of bilateral relations with India that has reached under the dynamic leadership of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and her counterpart to the highest level of leadership, maturity, and goodwill. Another key diplomatic success of Bangabandhu's foreign policy was to earn Washington's recognition of Bangladesh in early April 1972, especially in the backdrop of Nixon-Kissinger tilt toward Pakistan during a war of liberation. The plight and massacre of the then East Pakistanis and the denial of their right to form the government, in spite of the fact that they received overwhelming majority votes in the parliament in a fair and free election, got the sympathy of many intellectuals, poets, musicians, lawmakers, doctors, and academicians in USA who provided their unqualified support to our cause in 1970 and beyond. Mr. Tom Dine is one of them. I'm sure he would shed some light on this aspect of Bangabandhu's foreign policy. Today, Bangladesh-USA relationship stands on a solid footing, and the recognition to Bangabandhu's legacy has come from none other than former US Secretary of State, Senator John Kerry, during his visit to Bangladesh in August 2016. In the comment book at Bangabandhu Memorial Museum in Dhaka, he wrote, and I quote, "What a tragedy to have such a brilliant and courageous leadership stolen from the people of Bangladesh in such a moment of violence and cowardice. But today, Bangladesh is growing in vision of Bangabandhu and under the strong leadership of his daughter. The United States is proud to be a friend and strong supporter of the fulfillment of his vision," unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, Bangabandhu's life may have ended, but his legacy remains a constant source of our inspiration. He left behind a country of Bengalis, united to realize his dream of Sonar Bangla, a golden Bengal, a prosperous and stable economy, a right to vote, right to food, right to clothes, right to shelter would be guaranteed to every citizen, and where no one would be left behind. Over 4 decades after his death, the UNESCO added his 7th March speech in the memory of the World Register. It is jointly celebrating the birth centenary of Bangabandhu with us, and it introduced an international award in his name in the field of creative economy. His book, The Unfinished Memoirs, has been published in different languages and is being read by not only Bengalis, but also youngsters from all other nations. His daughter, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, is carrying forward the mantle with indomitable courage and boldness. She envisions transforming Bangladesh into a middle-income country by 2021 and a developed country by 2040. You'd be pleased to know in this week, Bangladesh graduated from LDCs. And as my permanent representative also mentioned, she has earned us UN's recommendation for graduation from the LDC category despite the unprecedented challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, Bangladesh is known for its significant contributions to the regional and international organizations as well as to the UN system. Especially, it has become a brand name of UN peacekeeping operations. Bangladesh, once known as a bottomless basket with no hope of survival, now it is a vibrant economy and a land of opportunity. Former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon termed it as a model of economic development, while Wall Street Journal calls it a standard bearer of the South. It is now a star of women empowerment and a model for disaster preparedness programs. Bangladesh has also 2 great resources, young manpower and plenty of waters, rivers and rivers. And if we can effectively and efficiently manage these resources, it can guarantee decent living and welfare of the people in no time. Following Bangabandhu's magnanimity, his daughter, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina opened her borders and gave temporary shelter to 1.1 million persecuted Rohingyas, the displaced people of Myanmar, out of humanitarian consideration. It is 4 years now, none of these Rohingyas could repatriate to their homeland, Myanmar. We need international pressure on Myanmar to repatriate them to their homeland with safety and in dignity. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be listening to the discussion of our expert panel on these issues. Let me now invite Her Excellency, Ms. Rabah Fatima, Honorable Permanent Representative Bangladesh, to you and take over the floor. I thank you all very much. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu.
I thank you, sir, for your very, very comprehensive statement touching upon important aspects of Bangabandhu's state and foreign policy, and also showing us how that remains equally relevant even today as Bangladesh plays and a constructive and responsible role in the Committee of Nations. Thank you, sir. We had initially lost you for a few minutes in the beginning, and I hope that you can stay on for the discussion. Distinguished guests, we'll now move on to our panel discussion, and I would like to invite Dr. Sanchita Saxena, the Director of the Studies, UC Berkeley, to take over from here and steer the discussion.
Okay, it's
over to you, Dr. Saxena.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your opening remarks, and the Honorable Minister for your talk. My name is Sanchita Saxena. I'm the Director of the Chowdhury Center for Bangladesh Studies at UC Berkeley and the Executive Director of the Institute for South Asia Studies, where the center is housed. The Institute for South Asia Studies has always had a deep commitment to Bangladesh, but this has been even more pronounced with the establishment of the Chowdhury Center in 2013. Through partnerships with leading institutions in Bangladesh, a vibrant lecture and conference series, and support of innovative research by faculty and graduate students, the Chowdhury Center has galvanized debate and engaged in thoughtful and critical conversations on many key issues around the economic, societal, political, and environmental transformations facing the country. I would just like to mention that the Chowdhury Center has organized 2 panels with leading academics and thinkers from around the globe in partnership with the American Institute of Bangladesh Studies to mark and celebrate the 50th anniversary of Bangladesh's independence. At the end of this month, we will focus on achievements and challenges of the Bangladesh economy, and in April, we will discuss the transformation of culture over the last 50 years. And please visit our website for more details on these 2 events. Today's event is a celebratory one, where we mark the birth centenary of the founding father of Bangladesh, Bangabandhu. Our panel will discuss various aspects of Bangabandhu's social, economic, and political vision for the country, his values and ideals, and how many of his ideals are still relevant today, not just for Bangladesh, but for other countries throughout the world. I will introduce our panelists in the order that they will speak. They will each speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will open up the floor to questions from the audience. Please remember to put your questions in the Q&A box. I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Salil Tripathi. He is the author of The Colonel Who Would Not Repent, The Bangladesh War and Its Unquiet Legacy, which was published in 2016. Mr. Tripathi was born in India, and he graduated from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College, and he has been an award-winning foreign correspondent for many years. He was based in various points in Singapore, Hong Kong, and London. Currently, he is based in New York. He chairs the PEN International's Writers in Prison Committee, and he has written other books, including Offense, The Hindu Case, and Detour's Songs of the Open Road. His next book about Gujaratis in India will be published in 2021. So, Mr. Tripathi, welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much. Now, I'm using the phone to use this because the internet in my house crashed. You know, America claims to be a first world country, but sometimes it acts as if it is not in the first world. So I do hope I'm audible. and visible. Because I'm speaking from a phone and not from my system. First of all, thank you for that kind introduction, and also the challenge that the Honorable Foreign Minister has given me about speaking about the India and Bangladesh equation and relationship, which I certainly will do. And I speak as a friend of Bangladesh, as a lover of the Bengali language and culture, and with humility and with a sense of privilege that I'm getting to speak on such an important day for Bangladesh. I want to take us back. I'm going to speak a little bit about what I've learned about Sheikh Mujib writing my book. I have to add that I was a 9-year-old schoolboy in Bombay, or what is now called Mumbai, in India, at the time of the war. And we had raised funds for the refugees, and we had done all kinds of things, which is all in my book. But I speak, therefore, as someone who had some lived experience of the war, even though it was only as a child. And too often in India, that war has been seen as a war between India and Pakistan, with Bangladesh as an afterthought. Now, I was fortunate to have a Bangladeshi woman as my boss. I used to work with Amnesty International, and Irene Khan was the Secretary General when I was working there. And she said, yes, we are grateful for what India did. But, we lost our brothers and our sisters were raped. And that has stayed with me. She was absolutely right, that the suffering was really in Bangladesh, not really elsewhere. The pain was borne by others. India helped, but it was a supporter, it was a bystander, and it played an important role. So I want to emphasize that in everything that I say, and I don't want it to be seen as a view of a country, but only of an individual. I can't speak for anybody except myself. I want to take us back to March 7. March 7 being the date, which is 1 week from now, Racecourse, Bangladesh, Dhaka, and Sheikh Mujib standing there and speaking, Ebare Shongram, Amade Shongram, Ebar Shangam, Muktir Shongram. There are video clips of that people will play again on the 7th March this year. It's the 50th anniversary of that wonderful, powerful speech. When I was writing my book, I had the privilege of speaking to at least 5 people who were in the audience on that day. One now lives in Chittagong, one in Barishal, and one elsewhere. And they were all mesmerized. Mahfouz Anam, the great editor of Daily Star, was the one who told me about the importance of this speech and what it meant to that generation. The nationalism that Sheikh Mujib spoke about at that time in that speech was an inclusive one. While the partition of India and Pakistan, of course, was on religious ground, Hindus on one side and Muslims on the other, he saw the Bengali nationalism early. And he was the one who spoke, whether it was 67, whether it was later, whether it was a 52 language movement. What he was talking about all the time was about an inclusive nationalism, which included the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Chakmas, the Muslims, the Santals, everybody. And I think we need to bear that in mind. The inclusive nationalism that he talked about was, in a sense, closer to the famous speech that Muhammad Ali Jinnah gave in Pakistan, when it was still being formed, 2 or 3 days before the independence, that this nation is open for everyone. That sort of secularism, where religion has a role, but it's not the dominant force. It's not something that is imposed on others, was important to him from the beginning. And I think it's something the entire subcontinent needs to learn from that now today. Bangladesh needs to learn that. India needs to learn that. Pakistan needs to learn that. The 3 large countries that I mentioned. And Sri Lanka, of course, has a sectarian strife over language. And Bangladesh knows what language nationalism means. I go back to Dhirendranath Datta's speech in the Pakistan National Assembly back in 1948, where he speaks about how is it that a poor farmer in Bangladesh going to be able to read something in Urdu. He needs Bengali. So that is the root of Bengali nationalism, rooted in a language, what we speak to each other, who we worship or who we choose not to worship, or if we don't worship is not important. And I think that sort of secularism was something that was understood at an early stage of Bengali nationalism. And I salute that. I think because the whole world needs that. It's not just Bangladesh that needs that today. There are 2 major achievements of Sheikh Mujib that I think the rest of the world can learn from. And I think I want to point out those. One is the whole notion of what to do with victims of sexual violence during armed conflict. If we look at what happened in Bosnia, if we look at what happened in Rwanda, of course, we are appalled by what has happened to women. We go even further back in the past and talk about comfort women in Philippines and Singapore, and what Japanese army did. But Sheikh Mujib honored the women who were violated. And I don't even want to use the word violated because it implies as though it was the women's fault what happened to them. They were survivors, they were brave women, and he came up with this word, Birangona. And I salute those women. I had the privilege and honor of meeting many of them during my work. And it was he who made sure that those women became part of the society and became and I think that that's a very major achievement that we must recognize. There have been books written about that. Noyanaka Chowdhury's wonderful book, The Spectral Wound. Then there is this film that Lisa Ghazi has made. Tamima Anam has written about it. Tarfia Faizullah, another great Bangladeshi poet, she has written about it. Sari Reem, the poem by is also another example that has come in recent years. And I think we need to recognize this exceptionally thoughtful step that the government took at that time in the 70s. Another one is the whole notion of international crimes and tribunals. We had the Tokyo Tribunal, we had the Nuremberg trials in the Second World War, but then the Cold War intervenes. And because the Cold War intervenes, we have a long period of time in which the whole notion of international crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, Hus Cohen, the peremptory norms violations were forgotten. And it was he who at that time felt that there was need with Kamal Hussein, who was his law minister at that time, one of the founders of the Constitution of Bangladesh. At that time, the need was felt to try the people who had committed mass atrocities. Now, history intervenes in an extremely tragic manner, and that did not happen. And ultimately, the Shahbag movement happens, and then we are reaching some sort of partial conclusion, some sort of solution, some sort of restitution, some sort of restorative justice, some sort of retributive justice. Now, all of those things are controversial aspects, and this is not the time to talk about that. But Mujibur Rahman realized that if you commit crimes against civilians during conflict, somebody has to account for that. And that's again another reason to salute. It's extremely tragic, the brutal. And one of my honors in 1986 is the first time I went to Bangladesh after I studied in the US. And I went to 32 Dhanabandi, the house of Sheikh Mujib. And I had the privilege and honor that Sheikh Hasina took me around the house. She was an opposition leader at that time. And she showed me where the assassination took place and what happened. And it must have been heartrending for her to tell those stories. And I've written about that in my book. But it was, and yet to be able to overcome that, seek justice on one hand, and try to build a Bangladesh that is closer to the vision that you want. That is, again, something worth noting. I'll come to that a bit more later. I want to talk a little bit about foreign policy, because that's a challenge that has been thrown up, that is the theme of the conversation today. Non-alignment. I mean, everybody today likes to joke about it by talking about it, that, it was pro-Soviet and all that. But what choices did he have? If we really go back and look at what happened in the 1960s and 70s and the circumstances leading up to the war, Sheikh Mujib and the Bangladeshi leaders of that time, whether it was, the four who were killed in the jails in 1976 and so on, the fact remains that it was a situation not of their making, not of their choice. Socialism was something that they believed in, but it was also imposed upon them. We have to remember that it was a very divided world, US on one side, Soviet Union on the other. You had a situation in which the US had consciously decided to partner with Pakistan. One reason why Kissinger and Yahya Khan had a great friendship was essentially so that China could be opened up for China. And that was a legitimate goal. Having good relations between US and China is important now, just as it was at that time. So I have no quarrel with that. But the cost was borne by Bangladesh at that time. Archer Blood warns about it. Gary Bass, Archer Blood himself has written a book about it, of course. But Gary Bass then writes this wonderful book, The Blood Telegram. Srinath Raghavan, the Indian defense specialist and academic, writes another book about it and tells us about what it meant. And we need to realize the situation where Bangladesh had no choice to make the kind of decisions it made at that time. I think it's very important that non-alignment was something that Bangladesh had to accept and deal with, and it made such a good job of it, as both the minister and the permanent representative showed. Within a short span of 3 years, it got the world to come around to it and agree with where we were at that time. I mean, I still remember when I was researching the book, I found that Bangladesh decided to trade with Cuba over jute, and it had no choice but to do that. But of course, US has its own politics on Cuba, and it has a Cuban American community, and that led to US not being as generous as it ought to have been to a country emerging from such a violent conflict. And it's something that US needs to bear in mind about what it did. And then let's look back at what Kissinger is supposed to have said. It's an apocryphal story. I have not seen an audio recording of it, but he did say that Bangladesh should be an international basket case. Ha, I say to that. Look at it today, whether it's social indicators, economic indicators, indicators on health, indicators on development, on female participation in labor force, in terms of female literacy. Bangladesh is doing than most of its neighbors in South Asia. Sri Lanka may be an exception. It has always been an outlier, as Dr. Amartya Sen, who is, of course, of India, but also a son of Bangladesh. He was born in Bangladesh, right? A Nobel laureate. They've all been pointing out that yes, Sri Lanka is an exception, but so is Bangladesh becoming one. So is Bangladesh becoming one in a very, very positive way. And I think something that's worth bearing in mind, that there are lots of achievements for which full credit to the women of Bangladesh who work in garment factories, the women of Bangladesh who fight for their rights, and for whose empowerment Sheikh Mujib had a major role to play, and the men of Bangladesh who have to go abroad and work and ensure that the economy does well. All those things are great achievements for which Bangladesh should be justly proud. The foreign minister threw a challenge at me to speak about the India-Bangladesh relation, and I wish India would do better. I really wish India would do better. India has been a huge beneficiary of what Bangladesh has done to itself in terms of cooperation with terrorism, in terms of the enclaves and that have been exchanged and so on, and in the support for the threat against insurgency. I mean, Bangladesh's role has been enormous in supporting that. But is India acting right in the spirit? Is the Indian response legitimate and genuine? We keep hearing about killings on the borders where, people who are supposedly or rumoredly or reportedly moving from the Bangladesh side to the Indian side because India needs that labor. I mean, migration is, never a one-way street, and it's not only the push factor, there is a pull factor. And at that time, how the border security force responds to that. There has been superb work done in Bangladesh by Chowdhury Abrar and Sarah Hussain and human rights experts like that, who have actually looked at that. And I think we need to look at that. India needs to examine itself whether the Citizenship Amendment Act, of the kind and the way it is being framed, is really good for conducive relations. Those are questions for India to address. This has nothing to do with Sheikh Mujib. But Sheikh Mujib and Indira Gandhi had a magnificent relationship. India did what it needed to do at that time. It played the role it needed to. It left when it had to, just as the refugees returned when they had to. And I think somehow in this 50th year of Sonar Bangla, if we were to go back to that time, go back to that spirit, I think both countries would benefit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tripathi, for such wonderful, passionate, and very thought-provoking remarks. I would like to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Thomas Dine. Mr. Dine has had more than half a century his career in American foreign policy. He has held many leadership positions, and now currently he is writing his memoirs, and he's staying involved in affairs affecting Middle East and South Asia. His career began as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Philippines in the 1960s. He has a master's in South Asian history. He has worked in Washington, D.C., with various members of Congress, and he has also worked at the U.S. Embassy in Delhi. And he has spent a decade in the U.S. Senate, working with several senators. For his efforts in 1971 to stop American arms to Pakistan, the government of Bangladesh awarded him a Friends of Liberation honor in a ceremony in Dhaka. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Thomas Dine to make his remarks.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And Mr. Minister, thank you for your outstanding presentation and for touching several key points, and that not only Mr. Tripathi, but myself will also touch. I was schooled and had 2 years experience in Delhi, as Dr. Saxena just mentioned. So I had knowledge about the subcontinent. I had knowledge of the tensions historically between West and East Pakistan. When the genocide began on the night of the 25th of March, I was one of only less than 5 fingers of people on Capitol Hill who knew where East Pakistan was, who understood the tensions, the racial tensions between the Punjabis and the Bengalis, and the fact that the Pakistan army was interfering and trying to change the result of a democratic election. The events of Washington in the last several weeks, month, about trying to stop the results of elections is not new to the world, although it has been new to the United States. But I thought so often during the last days of Trump about those last days before genocide in East Pakistan this past winter. Having said that, let me try to set the scene when the genocide began here in Washington. Two of us on Capitol Hill had lived in South Asia, and I knew who the other person was. He worked for Senator Kennedy, and he and I were friends. But as soon as I got two calls from members of the press covering the Senate and saying, hey, we know you know something about India, Pakistan, have you heard about what took place at Dhaka University last night? And I said, oh my God, I can imagine what it is. No, I hadn't heard it. And I immediately called my wife and said, and I used the word on the morning of the 26th of March here in Washington, it's genocide. So from then on, my goal was to educate senators and congressmen. My goal was to talk to the press. My goal was to help organize legislation against Nixon and Kissinger. And the foreign minister used the time-honored word tilt. And we didn't know it was a tilt then, but we knew it was high prejudice against India and no knowledge of East Bengal. The reaction here in Washington on both ends of what we like to use the phrase Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House and Capitol Hill, was not about democracy. It was not about Bengali nationalism. It was not about Sheikh Mujib. That his name wasn't even known, frankly. It was about American arms in the context of the war, ongoing war in Vietnam. Part of our political leadership favored sticking with Pakistan, quote unquote, an American ally. The other part said, hell no, it's a dictatorship, a military dictatorship in Rawalpindi, and we need to stop sending arms to Pakistan, which uses them now against its own people. And what developed was a group of intellectuals, mainly at the University of Chicago, at UCLA, and at the University of Wisconsin, who got involved. And they contacted me. I was sort of like the South Asian person working in the Senate. I was working at the time for Senator Frank Church, a Democrat from Idaho. So it was a few intellectuals. And then all of a sudden we met medical doctors coming back from East Pakistan who had been working at the cholera lab in Dhaka, outside of Dhaka, on the disease. And those two groups gave reinforcement to what Senator Church wanted to do. And then he was joined by Senator Saxby, a moderate Republican from Ohio, and offered legislation to cut off all arms, all American arms to Pakistan. And for the next 9 months, that's how we lived. And that's how we tried to reshape American policy. So Sheikh Mujib was not known. As more and more journalists wrote about him, and as Bengalis from East Pakistan came to Washington and briefed us, I'm thinking your former finance minister, A.M.A. Muheeth, was one of those individuals, and his good wife made wonderful food. And Rahman Saban, the economist, and others came to Washington, and we joined forces. Sometimes I'd come down, and my wife and I had a small house on Capitol Hill, and I would come down in the morning, there would be 5 people sleeping on our living room floor, and they were Bengalis who had recently arrived. So we got to understand Sheikh Mujib's nationalism, and then we caught up with what had taken place in the election in December, and then what had not taken place afterward, which was recognition and acceptance of the election. So it was a very tough time, but I think it's fair to say that we were not mesmerized, a word that Mr. Tripathi used. We were not mesmerized by Sheikh Mujib. We were angry at Nixon, Kissinger for a continuation of the weaponization of our foreign policy. When the revelation of Kissinger's trip to China came, yes, we all accepted it as good policy, an alteration of the tensions of the Cold War. But you don't have to preserve your relationship with China at the expense of the lives of others and the millions of people affected in East Pakistan and then in East Bengal, West Bengal in India. So I wanted to put that into context. It has taken time for the American people, or at least beyond intellectuals, to understand who this great leader of Bengali nationalism was and what he did. And I also, maybe this will be a little controversial, but I also want to say, at the time, our political efforts in Washington, who were against the war in Vietnam, was to stop it. And we wanted and it required legislation. So there is this traditional challenge between the two branches, the executive branch and the legislative branch, to shape and reshape American policy. Well, we were focused on Vietnam. And then all of a sudden, the situation in Bangladesh came up. And I thought at the time, and I still think, that if America had accepted the nationalism of Ho Chi Minh during World War II and afterwards, when he approached American officials for help in his struggle against French colonialism, if we had accepted Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and his nationalism in the 1960s, 1970, and 71, I think we would have had a more sound and effective foreign policy. But the tilt became the policy, and the opposition was on Capitol Hill. And I have written and believe that Nixon Kissinger believed in what Pakistan was doing, and both houses on Capitol Hill, the House of Representatives and the Senate, believed in what the valiant people in East Pakistan, or to be Bangladesh, were doing. So what I've written and what I believe is that there were two Bangladeshi wars. One on the actual battlefield and the cruelty and the killing and violence to women, etc. And there was one in Washington between the two branches over the outcome of Bengali nationalism and what Sheikh Mujib Rahman was trying to do. So I repeat myself, yes, he was a great man. Yes, he was the father of his country. Yes, he became a martyr, but he set out his country's foreign policies in the 1974 speech, as the foreign minister has said. And it's a fascinating growth. The fact that you now are a middle income country, praise the Lord. Praise the Lord and congratulations. And when Kissinger, in that vile way, said an international basket case, I hope he eats those words even today as he's reached the 100 mark in his life, because he's never apologized for what he did and the added to American cruelty uh, to the battlefield in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dine, for your remarks. And finally, I'd like to welcome Dr. Syed Anwar Hussain. Dr. Hussain joined the Department of History at the University of Dhaka, first as a lecturer in 1970. He became a professor in 1985, and he retired in 2014. Between 1997 and 2001, he was the Director General of Bangla Academy, the premier research body in the country. He received his master's degree in history from the University of Dhaka and his PhD in British administrative history from the University of London. Professor Hussain has been a visiting faculty at various institutions, including Columbia University, Penn University, the American University in Washington, D.C. He's been a scholar in residence at the Rockefeller Foundation Center in Bellagio, Italy. And he also has a Berkeley connection between 1987 and 1988. He was a senior Fulbright fellow at UC Berkeley. Professor Hussain, please join us.
Distinguished panelists, our Honorable Foreign Minister, and Her Excellency, our Ambassador Rabab Fatima. I was listening with rapt attention whatever that was being said by the two distinguished panelists, and none of them is from Bangladesh. And to me, it falls as a duty like a Bangladeshi to speak on Bangabandhu insofar as he related to Bangladesh. Well, I would try to share some anecdotes bearing on Bangabandhu's diplomacy and my experience as well. Let me start off with one incident that I went through as a student of Edinburgh University. On 27 September 1973, I was at the Accommodation Department of Edinburgh University, and the director of that department was Mrs. Morrison. I was seeking an apartment to live in because my class would start very soon. So she was looking frantically for an apartment which one could be found empty. At one stage, she was speaking with a landlady whose apartment was empty. The landlady asked Mrs. Morrison, "What is Bangladesh?" Because Mrs. Morrison had said, "I have a couple from Bangladesh." So, landlady didn't say, "Where is Bangladesh?" She said, "What is Bangladesh?" Because the word seemed so unfamiliar and unusual. So Mrs. Morrison sought my help. What should she reply to her? I said, "Tell her this is Sheikh Mujib's Bangladesh." She said that accordingly, and the landlady could understand very quickly that I was from Sheikh Mujib's Bangladesh. I wondered that the name of the country was unknown, but father of the nation was so much known across the world. Sheikh Mujib was known more than his country, Bangladesh. This is first incident. And in fact, this incident showed to me and demonstrated to me clearly how much the charisma of a leader like Bangabandhu was so dynamically active in projecting the image of the country. The second one, on 8th January 1972, immediately after his release from the Pakistani incarceration, Bangabandhu traveled to London and was put in the Claridge's Hotel. Sometime early in the afternoon, he had to address a press conference, very crowded indeed. At one stage of the press conference, one journalist put to him the question, Bangladesh is now a totally devastated country. What would you do by getting there? Bhagavanthu instantly replied with his usual self confidence: If I have my land and people, we will turn around again. In fact, he was envisaging a phoenix like rise of Bangladesh from ashes. He did that. He had 1,314 days to rebuild Bangladesh, to put Bangladesh on a path of development. By development, I mean not only economic development, but also political and diplomatic. I see that Bangabandhu initiated the process of development in all these sectors. And first of all, while coming to Dhaka on 10th January via London and Delhi, from when he took up from London, he was accompanied by Shashanko Banerjee, a diplomat working at Indian High Commission in London. Bangabandhu used to know this gentleman since the 1960s because Shashanko Banerjee, as a young diplomat, was working at the Dhaka Indian High Commission. So, and they were very close, Bangabandhu and Shashanko Banerjee. Bangabandhu broached the matter to Shashanko Banerjee that the Indian Prime Minister Srimati Indira Gandhi be informed about a query that he had. The query was, when would the Indian troops leave Bangladesh? And that message was transmitted even before Bangabandhu landed in Delhi. And in Delhi, they had this very short chat, Indira Gandhi and Bangabandhu. Both of them agreed that the Indian troops would join very soon. And after coming back to Dhaka on 10th January 1972, while addressing a mammoth reception at the race course, he clearly indicated that Srimati Indira Gandhi had already indicated that the Indian troops would drawn very quickly. And in fact, to cut the whole story short, the whole Indian troops left Bangladesh on 12th of March 1972. The reason was that by that time, China had started a negative campaign against Bangladesh. China was questioning whether Bangladesh was a sovereign and independent country since foreign troops were stationed in that country. So I would suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that the first diplomatic success scored by Bangabandhu was sending back the Indian troops so quickly. And nobody else, I would vouch for that, nobody else could have done that in such a short time. So that was his first victory, diplomatic victory. Then, of the many victories that I have in my memory, let me share with you another incident. During the 1973 Arab Israel war, Bangladesh sent the biggest medical team and 2 lakh pound of tea to help the Palestinians. And after that, Bangladesh was received very well in the Muslim world. And during the 1973 Fourth Non-Aligned Summit between 5th and 9th September in Algiers, Bangabandhu, in the course of his speech, came up with the statement, which was a pleasant surprise to many and astounded many. The statement was, the world is divided into two halves. the exploiters and exploited. I'm on the side of the exploited. As soon as Bangabandhu had finished with his speech, Fidel Castro came up rushing and embraced Bangabandhu, saying, Mujib, this is also what I would like to say, but you have said that already. And during that summit, Libyan leader Muammar al Gaddafi, who had been a staunch anti Bangladeshi in 1971, had a meeting with Bangabandhu for 35 minutes. After the meeting was over, when both of them were facing the journalists, Muammar al Gaddafi rose of his hands in prayer for Bangladesh's well being. So that was something like a chemistry which actually melted the ice between Bangladesh and Libya. And the chemistry was provided by nobody else other than Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. And after that, Al Ahram, the Arabic daily published from Cairo, wrote in its editorial that the Prime Minister of Bangladesh has conquered almost half of Africa along with the Arab states in a big battle without firing a single shot. So that shows the strength of the charisma of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. And to begin with, his diplomatic philosophy, I would say a diplomatic philosophy, he started with the statement that we would like to turn Bangladesh into a Switzerland of South Asia. And another principle that he used to always say, and which was indeed a continuation of the political heritage of the Bengali people right from the founding of the Awami League in 1949, friendship to all matters to none. And Bangladesh still meticulously follow the two principles in foreign policy. And at the time, uh, at the time of addressing the 29th General Assembly in 1974, 5th September 1974, Bangabandhu was requested to deliver his address in English because that would be more understandable by the members of the audience, but he refused to say. On the other hand, he asked his young diplomat Farooq Chowdhury to make instant translation of his speech into English. Farooq Chowdhury did that. So that he knew English pretty well. He knew Urdu, he knew Bangla, but he spoke in Bangla shows the extent of the pride that he used to take in speaking in his mother language, coming from Bangladesh. So I think his diplomatic philosophy was articulated more strongly when he said that we have to stand on our feet. And by the time he was assassinated, I think Bangladesh was certainly on its feet. And as many as 134 countries had recognized Bangladesh by that time. And Bangladesh did have a challenge and constrained beginning under the leadership of Bangabandhu. And as already been mentioned, that Bangladesh was prognosticated as a bottomless basket. But by the time Bangabandhu had to make his exit, that basket was fitted to the bottom, and that basket had also something in it. So I suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that Bangabandhu did show us the path towards development. And I do quote from John C. Maxwell, Professor John C. Maxwell. He said something very relevant in this context. He said, a leader is one who knows the way, travels the way, and shows the way. Bangabandhu did know the path towards independence, did know what Bangladesh stood for, and also showed the path towards Bangladesh's development economically, socially, politically, and diplomatically. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Professor Hussain, for your wonderful comments. So I'd like to welcome all the panelists now to the virtual stage. So I wanted to give maybe a few minutes if any of the panelists would like to either make any final comments or would like to respond to something that someone else has said. If you would like to do that, we have a few minutes. Maybe I'll start with Mr. Tripathi. Do you have any final comments or a response to what the other panelists have said?
Well, I think one of the things I learned again was it was good to hear from Mr. Line about what happened in 1971 at that time. You might remember David Weisbrot from the University of Minnesota, probably because he's a distinguished human rights scholar who was one of the young students at that time who was trying to raise funding. And I think we must remember that the struggle for Bangladesh, while the State Department and while people, maybe even in Whitehall in London, were not, for strategic and geopolitical concerns, not paying too much attention to it, there was a lot of public support for it. I mean, there was a famous concert for Bangladesh we should never forget, and the poem that Allen Ginsberg wrote, and so I think I just want to recognize that Ravi Shankar playing at that concert and so on. I think we need to recognize that there was public awareness, public support, and public concern for what was going on. And it may have been because of the anti-war movement of that time. I mean, I was too young to know. I was living in India, and so I'm speaking about what I've learned through other people's work. But I do want to recognize that all those friends of Bangladesh, many of whom are anonymous around the world, who played a role in championing what happened and supporting the people who suffered at that time. And I think it's worth recognizing that history is always made by little people and not just by those at the forefront. And I think that's something worth bearing in mind. The other thing I wanted to react to was, the fact that where is Bangladesh today? And, has it really reached the stage? I mean, the economic performance has been terrific. The socioeconomic indicators are very, very promising. But when we look at the other indicators, such as press freedom and human rights, Bangladesh has a case to answer. And I think what it needs to do is to examine itself. I mean, I'm not here to examine about what has happened and who is responsible for what. It's not for me to say, it's for Bangladeshers to struggle. But to explore why is it that people who write things are in jail. I go back to Rayer Bazaar, the famous monument for the martyrs, which is in Dhaka, where there is this poem, which, pardon my Bengali, it's not very good. Tomader ja bolar chai bolche kita Bangladesh. What you wish to speak is Bangladesh speaking that language today. And I think if we do see that secular, humane, humanistic, human rights-oriented vision of Mujibur Rahman today, it's a question that every country has to look at. Just as India has to look at, what it has made of itself, given that it's a land of Gandhi, whether Bangladesh is moving in that direction or not. It's a question that every Bangladeshi should ask himself or herself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tripathi. Mr. Dime, do you have any final comments or any responses to the other panelists?
I just again want to emphasize that how a basic way that Washington works. What is the grassroots telling senators and congressmen? And what we did in 1971 David Weisbrod, as Salil just mentioned, my wife, who had a 6-month-old baby, and several others who came in from nowhere. And we worked at the they worked at the Bangladesh Information Center to provide information to local journalists, editorial writers throughout the United States, and trying to get across this idea that your taxpayer money had been used to violate human life, human dignity. And it was a great moment. Now, just to mention just something about the Bangladesh concert. Those are important, but that didn't happen in the first 6 months. It took a while to start educating members of Congress to fan out and educate their staffs, educate their supporters, their major supporters, their minor supporters, and it was really Nixon's arrogance and stupidity that, particularly summarized by the tilt word, that eventually won the day.
Thank you, Mr. Dine. And Dr. Hussain, any final comments or any other thoughts?
I would like to add one
Oh,
thing.
please, please.
This is
a few.
this is Abdul Momen, Foreign Minister.
Okay.
Although Nixon-Kissinger administration violated their own laws, violated the international laws, to help Pakistan and help Pakistan to have this genocide. But most interesting thing is, which is untold story, is after 16th of December, when Bangladesh got independence, we kicked out the Pakistani soldiers. Since then, we applied for the UN membership on 8th of August, 1972. And then, of course, Pakistan's friend China even, cast its veto power. At the time, they got the veto power first time from, Taiwan. But the interesting thing is, there has been 16 resolutions for extension of Bangladesh to the UN membership. Out of 16 resolutions, only one time US abstained. The rest of the 15 times, they favored Bangladesh membership to the UN. This is a thing hardly anybody talks about. So, and this is one. Another item I would like to add, that's when Bangladesh delegation visited, Bangladesh government in exile, their delegation, led by Justice Abu Said Chowdhury, visited New York and the General Assembly. He was received at the airport, the then mayor, and they considered him, his delegation gave all the diplomatic, privileges. And not only that, when this visiting group met the then permanent representative of USA, Mr. Bush, later became president, Mr. Bush gave them an appointment. Being the permanent representative of USA, he gave an appointment to Justice Chowdhury, the leader of the group in the US embassy, in UN permanent mission. And there, when Mr. Bush was asked, when they finished the discussion, he was asked, when do you think, because he said that following Professor Edward Mason and this Dorfman and others, that the independence of Bangladesh is inevitable. The question is when and how long will it take to get the independence? Mr. Bush, the Ambassador Bush, told the delegation that you may expect your independence sooner than you think of. This is something very strange. Those who attended went to the discussion and met Ambassador Bush. He said, you may get your independence sooner than you think of. Can you believe it? So these are very interesting stories of those days. I'm sorry to take your time.
Oh, no, thank you, Dr. Mohan. That was fascinating. So Professor Hussain, any other final remarks?
Yes, indeed so. Thank you very much. I'd like to add a few more words, which are actually quotes from Bangabandhu, by way of showing how much peace-loving Bangladesh is. First one, on 23rd May 1973, the Asian Peace Conference was held in Dhaka, and Bangabandhu was awarded the Joliot Curie Prize for World Peace. While receiving the prize, he made a few comments, and I quote from him: "We do not believe in the arms race. We seek the friendship of all states, nations, in order to promote the welfare of the oppressed and exploited people everywhere. We are following a positive, non aligned foreign policy by keeping ourselves aloof from the military power blocs. Promotion of international peace and solidarity is not merely the policy of the government, it has been enshrined in our Constitution as one of the fundamental principles of state policy. Both in the preamble and in Article 25, the peace provision has been outlined by Bangladesh very articulately, of course. Second, SARC is the first regional body in a conflict-prone zone of South Asia, and Bangabandhu actually had conceived the idea of an association or a regional body like that. For example, in Calcutta on 6th February 1972, his first foreign trip, he said, "Let us bring to an end once and for all the sterile policy of confrontation between neighbors. Let us not fritter away our national resources, but use them to lift the standard of living of our people. We shouldn't be wanting, with all concern, for creating an era of peace in South Asia, where we could live side by side as good neighbors and pursue constructive policies for the benefit of our people." So these are the two quotes from Bangabandhu himself, which clearly show how much peace loving the nation of Bangladesh, the state of Bangladesh, was and is and will be in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hussain. So I would like to, there's a question from the audience, and this is the person is asking, what has been done from the Bangladeshi government's perspective with respect to teaching our younger generation about the leadership of Bangabandhu? And maybe the Honorable Minister, Dr. Momin, maybe we would like to answer this one.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Suchinta. You know, I met you a few years ago in the Berkeley in your center. At the time, it was not known as Subir Chowdhury Center. Anyway, thank you. Bangladesh government over the last few years, you see, because as you know, once there was an attempt to basically eliminate the name of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman from all the history books of Bangladesh. So just opposite to that, during the last 12 or 14 years, things are just different. Now, in the school, we allow kids to learn about this struggle and sacrifice of the father of the nation. And also the students are learning that he started his movement. He was a freedom fighter. He fought for the independence of Indian subcontinent. And then Pakistan and India was created. And immediately after that, in 14th August 1947, these two countries were established. India and Bangladesh, Pakistan with two wings separated by almost 1,000 miles. But since 1948, he has, since all the aspirations and expectation of the Bengalis who had, basically was ignored, and the people's voice was ignored. So Bangabandhu started his movement. And nowadays, the kids in the school and the college, they know that even in 1952, when we are fighting for language, the majority people of Pakistan on those days was Bengali speaking. Almost 56% were Bengali speaking, around 3 or 4% Urdu speaking. But Pakistani wanted to make Urdu as the state language. And there was one man who stood against it. Because on those days, to speak against in front of Muhammad Ali Jinnah was impossible. He had an indomitable leadership quality. But it was this young man, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who stood up and said, no, and again, so that means the people, and he created, when he did it, he don't do it alone. He created an organization known as Bangladesh East Pakistan Chhatra League, a student group. He is the founder of it. He also created Pakistan Awami Muslim League, which is currently the Awami League. So whenever he started a movement, he always, incorporated others into it. Always, he's a man who used to. I normally call he's a great communicator because he used to translate ideas and vision among the group. Even when he was in jail, he used to meet this group, the language lovers, and used to give them instruction. And following that, even in 1971, from 1952 to 1971, in 1971, when his party, the Awami League, got the majority votes, out of 169 parliamentary seats, his party got 167, overwhelming majority. But unfortunately, the Pakistani junta denied him to take form the government. So there was a non-cooperation movement, and afterwards leading to genocide, and then he declared the independence. So nowadays, our kids know about it. There have been government, these are in the textbook, and I believe enormous number of books have been published on Bangabandhu. And one great thing his daughter, the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, did. What he did, she, found out his unfinished memoir, and now everybody knows about it. It's beautiful, it's his story, a struggle before, 1971. And then another book, this Bangabandhu's visit to New China, and that shows his characteristics when he was visiting China, in as early as 1950, young man of 30 years old, and what was his vision. And then also Sheikh Hasina has done another great thing. All the books, all the reports, the security reports that were done during his struggle, 1948 onwards. And these are recorded in the police records, the police security secret. So she is publishing 14, books full of the stories of, these secret reports. So until now, 9 has been published. And this is an amazing document because you can see this young man, Bangabandhu, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, they have recorded all the things that he has done. Fight it. I have published his 100 lectures, all the lectures that he gave in the 100th century. I have compiled all his lectures. And I was amazed, even as early as 1954, 56, 86 in the parliament, the statement he's made, the speeches he made, they're so pro-Bangladesh. The idea was so fresh. So when we have got all those books, and you'd be happy to know thousands of the copies have already been sold. So people are taking interest, learning about Bangabandhu, and I hope a new generation will be pretty well versed on the sacrifice and the achievements of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Momin. I think we're coming up on
Words.
time. Oh,
Okay.
please, Professor Hussein.
Yes, indeed. In fact, many researches are going on throughout Bangladesh for producing books on Bangabandhu, throwing new lights. For example, the place where I work now, Bangladesh University of Professionals, I'm in the process of finishing the editing of a book, which is, I expect, to be quite different of the kind, because it is purely analytical, focuses mainly on his leadership. The title of the book is Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, A Profile in Leadership, which would be coming out very soon. Moreover, I have also personally authored a book, and this would also come out very soon. So many such books are coming out with research input, of course. So I think by the end of this year, we would certainly have handy quite a few interesting research-based books on Bangabandhu, which would certainly make him known not only to the Bangladeshi reading elite, but also across the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hussain. Unfortunately, we have a few more questions, but I think we're coming right at the time. So unfortunately, we have to close the seminar. But I wanted to thank again the Honorable Foreign Minister, the Honorable Ambassador, and all three of our distinguished panelists for their wonderful comments, thought-provoking. I wish we had more time, but I would like to pass it on to the Honorable Ambassador if she has any final remarks and would like to close the event.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Saxena. Nothing really, but I just wish to thank our distinguished panelists, Professor Hussain, Mr. Dine, and Mr. Bhatti for joining us today. It was a very rich discussion, and it's a pity that we have to close here, but I hope that we can continue the conversation again in another forum. And I wish to thank the Honorable Foreign Minister for joining us today. And sir, thank you very much also for your remarks. And I know it's very late in the day in Bangladesh now. You had also a very long flight, but thank you, sir, for joining us today. And I wish to thank the Center for Bangladesh Studies, our partner in this program, and thank you, Dr. Saxena, for the excellent moderation of the discussions. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to more of such collaboration in the coming days. And I wish to thank everyone who joined us and participated through the chat box. This was our first of our seminars under the Bangabandhu lecture series, and we look forward to your participation in the upcoming seminars. We were also very happy to see a large number of students, younger people who joined our program today. We actually have a plan to hold an event for the younger audience in the coming days. I hope that we can partner with some of you again for that program. But it was an excellent sort of discussion, especially we are grateful to all the panelists for bringing in different dimensions of Bangabandhu's life and Bangladesh's foreign policy. Thank you very much once again. Thank you. Sir, would you like to say something, sir? Any final comments, Honorable Foreign Minister?
I'm so lucky. Thank you, Shantita Saxena. Now I'm very pleased, and I must thank Shatil Tripathi. Beautiful analysis of it, and also Mr. Thomas Dine. I never had the chance to meet you, but Mohit has been telling about you a lot. And so the discussion was very rich, and this is useful. This is one of the, this year, when we are observing the 100th birth anniversary of the father of the nation, and also the 50th anniversary of Bangladesh, we welcome, more seminars, workshops on Bangabandhu and Bangladesh. Since Bangabandhu and Bangladesh are basically synonym. Without Bangabandhu, you cannot think of Bangladesh. Without Bangladesh, immediately the name comes up is Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Bangabandhu means friend of Bangladesh. So I'm so pleased that, the institution, your center has organized, and we would like to have more and more of these sort of discussions. And it is very rich, and I love it. Thank you so much to all the participants, and also to my good friend. The Anwar is my class friend, so I'm so happy he's around here.
Honorable Minister.
Okay, thank you. We'll say it together in the university at the same time. So I'm so pleased to have him there. And thank you, our Ambassador Abba Fatima, for organizing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shantita. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Okay. Have a good day. Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you very much. Joy Bangla.
Joy Bangla. Joy Bangla. Joy Bangla.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. Onek dhonnobad, sir. Onek dhonnobad. Dhonnobad, Shalil. Thank you. Thank you.
ধন্যবাদ, অনেক ধন্যবাদ।
দেখা হবে for সিঙ্গারা and চা. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank
Sir,
you.
thank you very much. Thank you.